Hello, great to be talking with you today. My name is Bruce Valpy. I'm a mechanical engineer underneath. I've enjoyed 30 years in the wind industry, both designing wind turbines and then consulting across the industry for governments, global energy players through to technology startups. I'm Managing Director of BVG Associates, a leading consultancy focused on the wind industry, working in the areas of strategy, economics and technology. On the left, you see some of our track record in offshore wind as industry builders from early days in Europe, especially helping the industry to establish in the UK. Now our role is very much global, and we've been busy recently in the US and in East Asia especially. Lots of relevant resources are listed here which are available at no cost on our website. But most of our work is serving private industry clients, and that's the green box on the right. So last year we worked for 9 out of 10 of the top global offshore wind farm developers and all of the top 3 turbine suppliers. They ask us to get involved when they want to do new things, think in new ways and solve tough problems. And that's especially when strategy, economics and technology overlap. And delighted to say we've enjoyed delivering a number of projects in Korea, often working with Blue Wind Engineering and our host, Dr. Joan Oh. The last box describes how we want to make more of a difference in Korea, and that's around accelerating the market through some sort of government industry deal, bringing people together with a common vision. Then to help Korean suppliers to either enter or grow their role in the offshore wind market, to help project developers with local economic benefit assessment, supply chain development, project site finding and cost analysis. We don't do standard project development management. We don't do construction management, environmental impact assessment, site surveys and detailed design. There's many other competent players that provide those sorts of services, and you'll be hearing from a number of them during the day today. So let's start by looking at some of the key trends in the industry, split into 3 groups. First, those that maybe are going a little slower than we expected in recent times. One of those is the US offshore wind industry. Maybe Biden's relatively recent announcement about offshore wind will change that picture significantly. But we've seen quite a few delays in the US market, and it's important to recognize that any emerging market can take time to really get going. Just beware of that as you work in younger markets. We also see maybe a slower impact of Internet of Things, AI and big data on the offshore wind industry. These technology terms are talked about often, but actually making a real difference to operating projects is taking more time than maybe we expected to work their way through. A couple of other big picture things. Carbon taxes and pricing has made slower progress than maybe we expected or hoped. I think that the world needs progress in that area. And also in energy system policy, we see good progress on some practical things around power to X and the wider energy system, but the mechanisms that encourage large-scale investment coming from governments have been slow. In the orange box in the middle, what things have been about as expected? Well, there's been a lot of industry maturing in offshore wind globally, and that's key. So this is in supply chains, this is in technology, this is in the way that people are contracting, the way that risk is managed and the like. For a many multi-billion dollar, pound, whatever industry, it's taken a little time for the industry to grow up in some of these areas, but it's much more solid than it used to be. Also, we've seen some significant changes in turbine supply in recent times, with GE growing a really solid market share. For a while there were only really 2 players acting in the European stage especially, and now it's great to have 3 solid players acting. And also highly relevant, Vestas demerging after their joint venture with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. So that joint venture splitting, and Vestas widening their scope, for example, with their investment in Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, getting involved in other areas of the value chain. We've also continued to see a significant increase in the size of turbines, both offshore and onshore. And this has a significant impact on reducing the cost of energy. But it has a significant impact right through the supply chain as well. It affects a lot of the component supply, but also the supply of foundations and installation vessels and the like offshore, where larger components and tooling is needed. What's been going a little bit faster than maybe we expected? Well, to be honest, I think interest in emerging markets. There are a lot more governments now really getting interested in offshore wind. Most of them wanting a local supply chain, and if you're wanting to drive down cost as well, then it's not likely that everybody's going to get what they want in that space. But we also see a lot of project developers taking notice of new markets and getting active in those markets. We continue to see oil and gas players working in offshore wind, and at least transitioning some part of their business to serving the offshore wind industry. Whether this is project developers at the highest level, Shells, BPs, Total, any other players entering the market, as well as players like Ørsted and Equinor that have been in the market for some time, or whether it's players in the supply chain that are transitioning. There's a lot of activity in that space. We also see activity in floating offshore wind pretty fast. This is both technology development, but also the starting of development of more demonstration and commercial scale projects. I think lastly, just wanted to highlight the activity around hydrogen and power to gas or power to X, all sorts of different technology options there. And we're just starting to see some of those technologies being trialed at demonstration phase. And there's real excitement, I think, in that space. And key there is that those technologies will be enablers for the growth of offshore wind and also other renewable technologies. Without them, the electricity-only systems will struggle to cope with the amount of renewable energy being generated at times, and the way of managing the balance between supply and demand. The other thing I wanted to share about the global market and trends is, I think we're really starting to get a clear picture of the key success factors for emerging offshore wind markets. So I wanted to share some of those with you. So the first group is around clarity on policy drivers. It's absolutely key for new markets to both for governments and for industry to be clear together on the key policy drivers for offshore wind in those markets. And the typical drivers are around low cost electricity, local jobs and economic benefit, security of energy supply, and long-term environmental sustainability. And especially in emerging markets, we often see a tension between the first two of these, low-cost electricity and local jobs and economic benefit. And that's a key challenge for emerging markets to grapple with. So the having visibility and confidence about a large volume market over time helps with all four of these policy drivers, especially the balance between A and B. Another key success factor for emerging markets is establishing strong frameworks. And these are the frameworks to enable offshore wind projects to progress. So I'm thinking of the way of administering seabed leases, permitting, power purchase agreements, and any sort of price support that helps projects to be financeable. Also, how things have progressed around grid, and I'm thinking very much more here of onshore grid upgrades and the like, rather than the offshore transmission arrangements connected with individual wind farms, but it reaches to that as well. And equally important are the frameworks to facilitate competitive and low-cost financing of offshore wind. The financing cost of the contribution of financing costs to cost of energy is significant, and countries have a key role to play in enabling suitable cost financing for offshore wind. So in thinking about these frameworks, it's absolutely key to be thinking at all stages about bankability, efficiency and confidence in these frameworks. And it's vital that good communication is established, and there's a realization of the importance of coexistence of offshore wind with other marine users. And it's also key in designing these frameworks. We've seen to get a successful market, it's key to create competition and to keep focus on costs and cost reduction. So clarity on policy drivers. So there's a clear vision of where the industry is going, strong frameworks to help the industry progress, and then constant delivery, consistent delivery to build volume. So this is about countries putting in place well-resourced institutions to manage the leasing process, permitting issues, grid development challenges and the like. It needs proactive management. The industry is a young, rapidly growing industry, and change is very normal for it. So frameworks and things that are put in place will need to carry on being managed and adapted over time to best deliver volume build out. And again, key to continue to have good quality and consistent government industry dialogue about some of the key challenges and opportunities. And for any market, it's really valuable to have some internationally competitive local suppliers. I say internationally competitive because to really establish a supply chain that helps drive down cost of energy, those players likely will need to be active beyond just home markets, and to do that they will need to be able to compete on a pretty global scale and pretty global stage these days. So those are some of the key global market and technology trends and some key lessons that we've started learning about how to do offshore wind. Now let's look at our long-term outlook. We have about 30 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity installed globally today, and our mid-forecast is for this to rise to a bit over 200 gigawatts by the end of 2030, 750 gigawatts by the end of 2040, and 1,400 gigawatts by the end of 2050, with a total spend during that period of over £3.2 trillion. The market is moving from one dominated so far by Europe to a market with three regions, Europe, Asia and the Americas. And each market will establish its own supply chain due to the costs of transporting such large equipment globally. There will be full crossover of technology and learning between markets, and many companies will play globally. So just wanted to reflect on the scale of technology in offshore wind these days, which has become truly massive. I started my career designing 300 kilowatt wind turbines with blades 16 meters long, and now we're 6 or 7 times that length, and many more times the rated power of the turbines. And we haven't finished yet. The scale will continue to grow, but it's good to just pause and realise that scale. So looking at projects that will be installed in a couple of years, in 2023, we're going to be seeing turbines like GE's Haliade-X, a 13 megawatt turbine with a 220 metre diameter rotor, and the nacelle, the part that sits at the top of the tower that we see a photo of here, being around 600 tons. And you can see how it dwarfs the team of people that are shown here in the photo on the left, or maybe how it dwarfs a rail carriage from the US on the right. We used to put blades in these sorts of carriages or transport nacelles on the rail network in the past. You can see how that's no longer in any way possible with the scale of turbines used in offshore wind today. So I mentioned blades. You see here a line again of people lined up. You can hardly see the line of people actually, but they're there. Line of people lined up along the full length of a GE Haliade-X blade. So this blade is 107 meters long, weighing over 50 tons, and I've superposed a couple of Dreamliner 787 Dreamliners on the image just to show a sense of scale. Blades are huge, like the nacelles, and hence then obviously need to be manufactured coastally. They're too big to transfer to transport on roads, and all need to be transported by sea. When we look at the foundations that are holding up these massive turbines, then again, look how many little wheels there are holding up this single monopile. This is admittedly one of the largest monopiles around, leaving to go to a project off Taiwan and having a mass of 1,700 tons. It's got a diameter of 8 meters, but we'll soon be seeing monopiles of greater than 10 meters diameter. Again, huge structures that can only be manufactured coastally, and you want to be able to get them onto the water as easily as possible, because even transporting them around a production facility or putting them into storage for a time before they're loaded onto vessels is a huge undertaking. So we looked at some of the components. Now let's just look at putting them together. In the middle we see a turbine being installed in 40 meter deep sea, with a monopile going into the seabed. And on the left we see the Samsung Tower Palace in Seoul. I think it's the highest, is it the tallest residential building in Seoul. And then on the right, the Lotte World Tower that does still dwarf offshore wind activity, and was too tall to fit on the slide that I've got here with everything at scale. But you see the installation vessel, one of the largest around at the moment, Yandenul's Voltaire, and the hook height of the crane there is significantly taller than the Samsung Tower Palace. And that's the biggest vessel around now, but we continue to see investment in new larger vessels, and more of those vessels will be needed as time goes on. The current generation of offshore wind turbines are in the sort of 12, 13, 14 megawatt scale. We'll soon hear the scale of Vestas's new product that'll be announced sometime soon. We can absolutely see how technology will stretch during the 2020s up to 30 to 20 gigawatt scale. But there's no reason why turbines shouldn't go larger than that in the future. Maybe the relative benefit of scale is starting to slow down, but we see no real technical limits to the growth of future offshore wind turbines. So I've talked about some of the global trends and looked at the technology. I just wanted to focus now in a final slide really on what this means for Korea. And I think the first thing is to say is that there are huge opportunities for a number of East Asian markets where there are good offshore wind resources. There are suitable conditions. There's a local supply chain that can really make a difference and provide cost-effective components, and there's a need for low carbon, sustainable, clean electricity as countries move away from a significant dependence often on coal. So for Korea specifically, I start off in the top blue box for, I think, a key opportunity for government and industry together. And that is to agree a positive, realistic way forward that works for most parties. I think up to now we've seen a lot of promise in Korea, a lot of talk for quite a few years about a potential market. But we've seen other countries maybe just making more solid progress, and we continue to hear divergent views as to how to progress. So we really see value in some government industry collaboration to accelerate the market. And this is to help establish clear market and industrial policies, to build those strong frameworks that I was talking about that really work for government and work for industry, to grow strong, good communication, build confidence, and manage the challenges of coexistence, not least with the fishing community in Korea. We think that work really needs to take benefit of international relationships. This is both at governmental level in learning lessons from elsewhere in the world, but also at an industrial level, tapping into the learning that has been so vital in reducing cost of energy over recent years elsewhere in the world. So we think it'll be really important to find a rational balance between cost of energy and local content. And to find again a rational balance between fixed offshore wind farms, so I'm meaning with foundations that are fixed to the seabed, monopiles, jackets, gravity bases, which will happen. There'll be more of those sort of projects in the early years, and then a floating industry that will grow up in time, and especially towards the end of the decade. It'll be absolutely key looking forward to establish a vibrant, competitive market in offshore wind, and to note that sustainable long-term jobs will come from a long-term market and an internationally competitive local supply chain. And I think people have learned that you create more long-term jobs by establishing a larger market than you do by ending up having a smaller market by maybe putting in some more restrictive practices that are supporting local content more, but missing out on some of the competition and the international learning. So in green, what are some of the things, what does this mean for government? Well, to focus on getting volume of offshore wind right at the right cost of energy. So collaboration, as I've just been mentioning, getting the involvement of experienced industry players, and ensuring that the market that establishes is using the latest, biggest turbines. So that maybe does mean working out what happens for local supply of turbines and turbine components. And also key is to establish a supply chain that can export regionally, is internationally competitive. And this means playing to the strengths of Korea. There's a lot of competence and capability located coastally in some key industries in Korea. But it's also not seeking to do everything within Korea, also playing to the strengths of the global market and other regional countries. For industrial players, last box on the right here, what does this mean for you? Well, as I've said, in many areas the market opportunity and competition will be regional or global. The opportunity is huge. There will be many people that succeed hugely in offshore wind, and there will be many thousands of people that aren't working in the industry today that will be in 10 years' time. But I'd encourage those looking at the market today to really learn from other markets, to consider carefully international collaboration in order to build on the learning established elsewhere, and again to play to your strengths, remembering that your customers in offshore wind will likely be global players, whether that'll be a global player acting as a wind farm developer in collaboration with a Korean player, or acting alone. We expect that those global players will be in the loop around technology and purchasing decisions, so they know what technology is available, they know what costs are in the global market, and you'll need to compete on that basis. I think another important thing to remember is that the technology will keep getting larger. It's the key driver of cost reduction. So you need to plan investments with future growth in mind. This leaves challenges at times because it can often be expensive to build new facilities with room to expand and make larger components in future. But people have learnt the lessons in Europe that if you don't do that, a facility can really relatively quickly in a handful of years become outdated. But this technology getting larger also carries on leaving room for many new ideas, and that gives great opportunities for new players to enter the market, or existing players to grow their opportunities. And this increase in scale will continue to drive the need for new vessels and new foundation manufacturing facilities, but also technologies. And we see that Korea has some real strengths in these areas. So it bodes well for the opportunities in Korea. So that's it from me. Please get in touch if you want to discuss anything that I've said, or to explore how we may be able to help you with your making the most of your opportunities in offshore wind. Thanks very much.